Hello everyone. Let's subscribe to Relationship Stories before we forget. You won't want to miss what's coming up next.
Spencer Christian, a successful construction engineer, thought he had it all until his personal life began crumbling like a fragile structure. After devoting years to his career, his marriage to Ellen, once filled with love, has become a battlefield of resentment and bitter words. When Ellen suggests a separation, Spencer is forced to confront the painful truth: their foundation is cracking beyond repair. But as secrets emerge and the bonds of trust unravel, Spencer must decide whether to fight for what's left or walk away from the ruins of a life he thought was unshakable. My name is Spencer Christian, and I'm a 48-year-old construction engineer. I build things, towers, bridges, structures that stand the test of time. But when it came to my own life, my own marriage, it was starting to feel like I couldn't hold a single thing together. Today should have been a day of triumph. I had just completed the most ambitious project of my career, a 40-story tower on the shores of Lake Erie, brought in on time and under budget. Everyone thought I'd fail, but I didn't. And now, as I walked into the boardroom at headquarters, I expected praise, maybe a hefty bonus, a reward for all the long nights and weekends I sacrificed, for the time spent away from Ellen, away from home. Ellen. Even the thought of her name brought a tightness to my chest. We'd been married for 23 years, raised 2 kids together, Mary and Martin, who were now in college. But things between us had shifted. The love that used to come so easily felt strained, distant. I knew my job had played a part in it, with the hours I worked, the projects that consumed my attention. But it wasn't just that. Ellen had changed, too. She had become sharp, bitter, like every word out of her mouth was an accusation, as if every success I had somehow took something away from her. I tried to tell myself things would get better once this project was done. Once I could finally breathe. Once I had time for her again.
Spencer, congratulations! You pulled off the impossible, and now we want to make you an offer, Managing Director of Operations for the South. It's a huge promotion, and it's yours if you want it.
For a moment, the weight lifted. This was it. This was the kind of break that could change everything, for my career, for my life. But the thrill that surged through me was quickly met with something else, something colder. Would this change anything between Ellen and me? Or would it just be more time away, more distance, more silence? I told John I'd think about it, that I needed to talk to Ellen first. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. Would she even care? Or would she just find another reason to be angry, to lash out? I walked into the house, the smell of whatever she was cooking filling the air. Ellen was at the stove, but when she turned to look at me, her expression was already twisted into that familiar scowl.
Well, you're home early. What did they give you this time? A pat on the back for all your hard work? Or maybe a few crumbs just to keep you satisfied while they pocket the real money? Narrator.
It was always like this now, her words, sharp like a knife. There had been a time when coming home to Ellen was the best part of my day, but now it was something I dreaded. She knew exactly how to cut deep, how to find that spot inside me that was already raw and twist the blade. I wanted to tell her about Atlanta, about the promotion, about how this could be a fresh start for us. But as I stood there, the words caught in my throat. She was angry, bitter, and all I could feel was the heat of my own frustration rising inside me. I decided to hold it back. Let her keep spitting her venom. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing. They didn't mention a bonus. Just a quick meeting. The lie tasted bitter, but I swallowed it down. As expected, she exploded, her voice rising, her anger flaring, but I let it wash over me. I kept my mouth shut, knowing that nothing I said would make a difference. But then, out of nowhere, she said the words that knocked the air right out of my lungs.
I think we need a separation, Spencer. I need time away from you. Time to figure out if there's anything left between us.
Her words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. I should have felt devastated, but instead, there was a strange sense of relief that washed over me. Maybe she was right. Maybe time apart would be good for us. Or maybe it was just easier than facing the fact that we were already falling apart. If that's what you want. I couldn't bring myself to argue. Part of me was angry, but another part was just tired. Tired of the fighting, tired of the constant tension. Maybe we both needed this. Maybe I needed it more than I realized. The days leading up to the separation were quiet. Too quiet. I moved into the guest room, packed my things slowly, methodically, like I was preparing for more than just a month apart. There was no grand confrontation, no big fight, just a slow unraveling. A marriage coming undone one moment at a time. We sat down one evening to set the terms. Over coffee, we talked about what this trial separation would look like. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we were, discussing the breakdown of our marriage like it was a business arrangement, like it was just another project to be managed. No dating. No other people. We're still married, Ellen. No men in the house. We need to respect that. She nodded, almost too quickly, her face unreadable. There was a chill in the air between us, an unspoken truth neither of us wanted to acknowledge.
Of course. No men. And no women for you either. It's only fair.
She said it with a smile, but there was something behind her eyes, something that made my stomach twist. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was already 1 foot out the door, already thinking about what life would be like without me. That night, I moved into the club, setting up my life in a sterile, impersonal room that felt like a hotel. It was strange, being away from her, from the life we had built together. But the silence was a relief. I could finally breathe again. I told myself this was what we needed, that time apart would bring clarity. But deep down, I knew it wasn't time we needed. It was something else, something that had been missing for a long time. Then came the call. Her voice was softer than usual, like she was trying to reach me from a place we hadn't been in years.
Spencer, I'm sorry. I know I've been difficult. I know things haven't been easy. But I still love you. I hope you know that.
Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her, to let myself feel something other than anger and resentment. But all I could think about was how far apart we had drifted, how much we had lost. I know, Ellen. I love you too. But we need this time. We need to figure things out. I hung up the phone, the ache in my chest spreading like a poison. What were we even trying to figure out? How to pretend we hadn't already lost each other? Weeks passed, and I buried myself in work, focusing on the move to Atlanta. But Ellen lingered in the back of my mind, like a ghost that wouldn't let me rest. We spoke occasionally, each conversation more distant than the last. It was like we were slowly erasing each other from our lives, piece by piece. Then, one night, she called, asking to meet at the club. I knew what it meant before she even said the words. There was someone else. There always was. We sat across from each other in the dining room, the tension between us so thick it was suffocating. She looked nervous, like she was bracing herself for a fight. So, what is it? You've met someone, haven't you? Narrator. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something, guilt, maybe? I couldn't tell. But I knew. I had known for a long time.
There's a man. His name is Walter. He's new in town, just an instructor at the Y. He asked me if I could show him around. I haven't agreed to anything yet, but I wanted to tell you.
Her words were calm, almost rehearsed. But they hit me like a hammer. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing. I wanted to believe her, that it was innocent, that it meant nothing. But after everything, how could I? I felt the words boiling up inside me, but they got stuck in my throat. It was like every moment of the past year had led to this single, brutal confirmation that something was breaking between us. I had known it for a long time, felt it like an ache that never left, but hearing it come from her mouth, it made the hurt real. So, you've already made up your mind, haven't you? Whether you admit it or not, you've decided. Narrator. She looked away, the tension in her jaw tight, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed something to hold on to.
It's not like that, Spencer. I told you because I wanted to be honest. I wanted to clear things with you first. It's nothing.
Nothing. That's what she was calling it. But it was the nothing that had been eating away at our marriage for over a year. The nights when she would turn her back to me in bed, the distant look in her eyes when I came home from work. The biting remarks, the cold indifference. All of it had been leading to this, her standing in front of me, telling me it was nothing. Don't lie to me, Ellen. Don't stand there and pretend like this is innocent. You let him into your life because you wanted to. And you let him in because there's no space for me anymore, is there? I saw the flash of guilt cross her face, a crack in the armor she'd been wearing, and for a second, I thought I'd finally gotten through to her. But just as quickly, she straightened up, her wall slamming back into place.
I'm not doing anything wrong. I haven't crossed any lines. I told you I wouldn't, and I haven't.
But it was in the way she said it, that dead tone in her voice, that told me she already had. Maybe not physically. Maybe not yet. But emotionally, she was already gone. And that was the part that gutted me. She wasn't even fighting for us anymore. Do you even care what this is doing to us? What this is doing to me? I didn't mean for my voice to crack, but it did. The pain I had been trying to bury for weeks, months, clawed its way up, and I couldn't stop it. I felt like I was grasping at something slipping through my fingers, but no matter how tight I tried to hold on, I was losing her. Ellen sat in silence for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost too soft to hear.
Maybe we both need something different. Maybe this isn't working anymore. I don't know.
It was like she had just reached into my chest and ripped my heart out, right there in the middle of the club. I had known, deep down, that things weren't right between us. But hearing her say it, hearing her give voice to the possibility that we were done, it was like being hit with a sledgehammer. The worst part was, I couldn't tell if she felt any of the pain I was feeling. She had this calmness about her, this resignation, like she had already accepted it. Like she had already made peace with walking away. Is that what you want? To just end this? After everything? I didn't even realize I was on the verge of tears until I felt the burn in the back of my throat, the pressure building behind my eyes. I swallowed it down, refusing to let her see me break. Not here. Not now. But Ellen didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was answer enough. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed at the club, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. Every word felt like another stab to the heart, every moment between us now colored by the knowledge that she was drifting further and further away from me. I had spent so long trying to keep us together, telling myself that if I just worked a little harder, sacrificed a little more, everything would fall back into place. But I was wrong. I was losing her. No. I had already lost her. A few days later, I needed to pick up a file from the house. I called Ellen to let her know I'd be stopping by, hoping to make the exchange as quick and painless as possible. But as I pulled into the driveway, I saw a car parked there that I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. I knew, before I even knocked on the door, before she opened it, I knew. And the sickening dread that had been gnawing at me for weeks bloomed into full-blown certainty. When Ellen opened the door, she looked startled to see me. For a moment, she froze, her eyes wide, her mouth half opened as if caught doing something she shouldn't have been doing. And then I saw him. Standing behind her in the kitchen, casual as anything, was Walter.
Spencer! I didn't expect you so soon.
Her voice was strained, like she was trying to hold it together, but her eyes darted nervously between me and Walter, like she was waiting for the explosion. I didn't give her the satisfaction. We need to talk. In private. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked into the study, the familiar room where we had spent so many nights together, talking about everything and nothing. But tonight, there was nothing left to say. Ellen followed, closing the door softly behind her. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. What is he doing here? My voice was calm. Too calm. But beneath the surface, I was barely holding it together. The anger, the betrayal, the sickening realization that the woman I had loved for 23 years had already replaced me, it was all bubbling up inside, threatening to spill over.
I just wanted you to meet him. So you'd see it wasn't what you think.
Her voice was small, almost childlike, and for a second, I thought she might actually feel guilty. But then she said it, those words that shattered what little was left of me.
I invited him over for dinner. Just to talk.
She tried to look me in the eye, but I turned away. The rage was rising now, drowning out everything else. She had broken the rules, our rules. No men in the house. No dates. She had promised. And she had lied. You said there'd be no men. You promised, Ellen. My voice was shaking now, and I hated it. I hated that I couldn't control the hurt, the betrayal that was choking me. She said nothing, just stood there, staring at the floor like a scolded child. But this wasn't some minor transgression. This was our marriage, our life, falling apart in front of me. You want to tell me the truth now? Or should I just leave you two alone? I didn't wait for her answer. I couldn't. The pain was too much. I grabbed the file I had come for, walked past her, and out the door. As I left, I could feel her eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to look at her. That night, I drove aimlessly for hours, not knowing where I was going, not caring. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. I had given everything to our marriage, to Ellen, and this was how it ended. With a stranger in our home, in the life we built together. By the time I got back to the club, I was numb. I unplugged the phone, knowing Ellen would try to call. I couldn't bear to hear her voice again, not after everything she had done. I collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling, my heart hollow and aching. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had betrayed me in ways I could never forgive. And the worst part? I didn't even know if I cared anymore. The following days passed in a haze. I buried myself in work, focusing on the upcoming move to Atlanta, anything to distract me from the gnawing pit in my stomach. But every free moment was consumed by thoughts of Ellen, her voice, her face, the image of Walter standing in our home like he belonged there. The trust that once held our marriage together had been shattered, and I couldn't figure out if there was anything left to save. I tried not to think about her too much, but it was impossible. She was everywhere, in every thought, every memory. I couldn't escape the weight of it, the betrayal, the disbelief that she would throw away everything we had built together for someone else. For someone who wasn't me. Then, one evening, I received a message from my lawyer, Flynn Connor. He had already filed the divorce papers, just as we discussed. The reality of it hit me like a freight train, but what could I do? The woman I had loved for more than 2 decades was gone. I had to stop pretending that we could somehow go back to how things were before, that this was something we could fix. Flynn told me it would take months to finalize the divorce. That's how it worked, even if it was uncontested. But those months stretched out like an eternity in front of me. How was I supposed to survive this? A few days later, I called Ellen. I didn't want to, but there were things left unsaid, things that needed to be settled before the divorce moved forward. The phone rang a few times before she answered, her voice sounding hollow, empty, like she already knew what was coming.
Spencer, I didn't expect to hear from you.
Her tone was cautious, as if she were afraid of what I might say next. But I didn't want to play games anymore. I didn't want to dance around the truth, pretend that this was anything other than what it was. I'm leaving for Atlanta soon. The papers are filed, Ellen. It's done. I could hear the sharp intake of her breath on the other end, the silence that followed heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I wondered if she would try to fight me, if she would beg for a second chance. But I should have known better. She had already made her choice.
Spencer. I didn't want it to come to this.
Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but there was no conviction behind it. It felt like she was just going through the motions, saying what she thought she was supposed to say. But it was too late for that. Too late for apologies or regrets. You did this, Ellen. You broke us. And now I have to move on. The words were harder to say than I expected. Even after everything, after all the lies, the betrayal, there was still a part of me that wanted her to fight for us. But she didn't. She never had. The day I left for Atlanta felt surreal. I packed up the last of my belongings, loaded them into the car, and drove away from the life I had known for so long. It wasn't just the city I was leaving behind, it was the memories, the pain, the hopes I had once held for the future. It was all of it, wrapped up in a box I didn't want to open again. As the plane took off, I stared out the window, watching the ground disappear beneath me. I had no idea what waited for me in Atlanta, no idea what my life would look like on the other side of this mess. But I couldn't stay in Cleveland. I couldn't stay in the place where everything had come undone. Atlanta was different. The air was warmer, the sky clearer, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe this was the fresh start I needed. The job was everything I had hoped for, a big promotion, a chance to build something new. But even in the excitement of the new role, Ellen lingered in the back of my mind, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I settled into a furnished apartment, temporary until I could find a more permanent place. It wasn't home. It would never be home. But it was quiet, and for now, that was all I needed. A few days after arriving, I went out for a run, trying to clear my head. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the city, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to let go of everything that had been weighing me down. But when I returned to the apartment, I found her waiting for me. Ellen. I stood frozen in the doorway, my breath caught in my throat. I hadn't told her where I was staying, hadn't given her my new address, and yet, here she was. She looked different, softer somehow, like the sharp edges that had defined her for so long had been worn down. But I couldn't let myself believe that. Not after everything. What are you doing here? My voice came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't help it. Seeing her here, in my space, after everything we had been through, it felt like an intrusion. Ellen didn't flinch. She stood there, calm, composed, her eyes searching mine for something I wasn't willing to give.
I needed to see you. To explain.
I wanted to tell her to leave, to shut the door in her face and walk away. But there was something in her voice, something in the way she looked at me, that made me pause. So I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me. Explain what, Ellen? You've already done enough. She nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. I hadn't seen her like this in a long time, vulnerable, uncertain. It was like she was trying to reach me, but I didn't know if I wanted to be reached.
I made mistakes, Spencer. I know that. I let things get too far. But I never slept with him. I swear to you, it didn't happen.
I stared at her, the words bouncing around in my head, but they didn't stick. They didn't erase the hurt, the betrayal, the months of wondering if she had already moved on. I don't care, Ellen. Whether you slept with him or not, you chose him. You chose to let him into our life. That's what matters. I could see the pain flash across her face, but I couldn't let it affect me. I had spent too long drowning in my own pain to worry about hers.
I didn't choose him, Spencer. I was lost. I felt like I was disappearing, like everything we had was slipping away. And I didn't know how to fix it.
Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had stood by my side, who had loved me with everything she had. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. It doesn't matter. It's too late. We're too far gone. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way her breath hitched as she tried to hold back the tears. But I was too tired, too broken to care anymore.
Please, Spencer. Don't do this. Don't throw us away.
I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me, but there was nothing left to save. Nothing but ashes where our marriage had once been. I shook my head, my heart heavy with the knowledge that this was the end. You threw us away, Ellen. Not me. You. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as the last bit of hope drained from her face, leaving only resignation behind. She stood there for a moment, her shoulders slumping, before she finally turned and walked out the door. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief, but it was quickly followed by a hollow emptiness that settled deep in my chest. Ellen was gone. For good this time. And I was alone. After Ellen left, the silence in my apartment felt suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of everything we had been, everything we were supposed to be. I wanted to feel relief, to feel free from the weight of it all, but all I felt was emptiness. The finality of it hit me like a wave, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to break. I sank down onto the couch, burying my face in my hands, and let the tears come. I hadn't cried in years, not since my father passed. I had always been the one to hold it together, to keep everything under control. But now, with nothing left to hold onto, I couldn't stop the flood of emotions. The pain of losing her, the anger, the betrayal, it all came crashing down, and I was powerless to stop it. For 23 years, I had built my life around her, around us. Every decision I made, every sacrifice, it was for our family, for our future. And now, it was all gone. Torn apart by the very person I thought would stand by my side forever. The next few weeks were a blur of work and numbness. I threw myself into my job, into the projects in Atlanta, anything to keep my mind off the gaping hole in my chest. I found a new routine: wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, and repeat. There was no room for anything else. No room for feeling. It was easier that way. Flynn called me a few times with updates on the divorce, but I could barely bring myself to listen. The papers were filed, and now we were just waiting for the legal process to run its course. I should have been more involved, should have asked questions, but I couldn't. I had done everything I could. Now, I just wanted it to be over. One night, a few months later, I received a call from Mary. I hadn't told her or Martin about the divorce yet. I didn't know how to explain it to them, how to tell them that their mother and I had failed, that we had let everything fall apart. But now, with the papers about to be finalized, I couldn't put it off any longer.
Dad? What's going on? Mom's been acting weird, and she won't tell me anything. Is everything okay?
Her voice was filled with concern, and I could feel my heart constrict. How could I explain this to her? How could I make her understand when I barely understood it myself? Mary, things between your mom and me, they haven't been good for a while. We're getting a divorce. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her breathing, could feel the weight of the silence between us.
Divorce? Dad, why? What happened?
I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. How could I explain the years of distance, the bitterness, the betrayal, in a way that wouldn't break her? How could I protect her from the truth? Your mom and I, we just grew apart. We stopped being able to make things work. I don't want to get into the details, Mary. Just know that it's not your fault. It's nothing you or Martin did. I heard her sniffle, trying to hold back tears, and it broke me. I had failed her too. Failed to protect her from the fallout of a broken marriage.
I didn't know. You both seem fine. I don't understand.
I didn't have the words to make her understand. How could I explain that the woman I had loved, her mother, had become someone I didn't recognize? That the life we had built together had slowly crumbled until there was nothing left but dust. Sometimes things don't work out, Mary. No matter how much you want them to. The call with Mary left me feeling even more hollow than before. The realization that I had not only lost my wife, but had also let down my kids gnawed at me, consuming what little strength I had left. The divorce was finalized a few weeks later. I signed the papers, handed them to Flynn, and that was it. 23 years of marriage reduced to a few signatures on a legal document. It felt unreal. I thought I would feel a sense of closure, but all I felt was numb. The anger, the sadness, it had all settled into a kind of dull ache that I carried with me everywhere I went. Ellen sent a brief message through Flynn, thanking me for keeping things civil. It felt like a final insult. Civil? After everything she had done, she wanted to pretend like we had handled this amicably? But I didn't respond. I couldn't. It wasn't worth it. Months passed, and life moved on. I moved into a new apartment in Atlanta, finally finding a place that felt somewhat permanent. I filled my days with work, long hours on site, and quiet nights at home. I was rebuilding, brick by brick, but something inside me felt irreparably broken. The pain of betrayal didn't just go away, it lingered, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. I heard through the grapevine that Ellen had moved on. She was still in Cleveland, still living in the house we had shared. Walter was gone. Whatever fling she had with him had ended, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. I no longer cared who she was with, what she was doing. She wasn't my concern anymore. But despite all of it, despite the months that had passed, the healing I had tried to do, I couldn't shake the memories. Every time I saw a couple walking down the street, hand in hand, or a family laughing together at a park, a familiar ache settled in my chest. It was the life I thought I would have. The life that had slipped through my fingers. One evening, about a year after the divorce, I found myself sitting on my apartment balcony, watching the sun set over the city. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, a quiet beauty that felt so far removed from the chaos of my life. As I sat there, I realized something: I had survived. The pain was still there, the betrayal still stung, but I was still standing. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Ellen was a memory now, a ghost of a life that once was. I no longer hated her. I no longer felt the anger or the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. In the end, we were two people who had lost their way, two people who couldn't find their way back to each other. And that was okay. I wasn't whole, but I was healing. Slowly, quietly, I was finding myself again. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the man who looked back at me. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had stood in that boardroom in Cleveland, full of hope and expectations. I wasn't the same man who had fought to save a marriage that couldn't be saved. I was different. And as I looked at my reflection, I realized something: I was still here. I was still breathing. Still moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that resembled hope. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever trust someone again, if I would ever open myself up to the possibility of love. But I was willing to try. I was willing to see what came next. The past was behind me, and while it had left its scars, it no longer defined me. I was ready to move on. As I walked out the door and into the bright Atlanta morning, I felt the weight of the past lift, just a little. It would always be there, but it no longer held me down. I had survived. I had endured. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was free.
Could taking his wife back yield it better for him in life, since his wife had already confessed that nothing really physical had happened?
That's the story I've shared with you today. If you enjoyed it, make sure to check out my playlist for more similar stories.